Good afternoon and welcome all participants in today's Regional Distance Seminar series from Center of Excellence COE JJH Mumbai. Topic is clinical aspects and infection control of COVID-19. Our speaker is Dr. Priya Patil. Dr. Priya Patil is currently working as a Deputy Director COE, JJ Hospital Mumbai and alternate nodal officer for both ART center at JJH. She is as an Associate Professor of Medicine Medical Government College and Sir JJ Group of Hospital, Mumbai. She did her MBBS and MD from BJMC Pune. She has done many thesis studies on HIV, out of which one is published. She has done study on ICMR on OI profile in HIV. Now I request Dr. Priya Patil Madam, please start your session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I welcome everyone to today's topic of discussion, that is clinical aspects and infection prevention control of COVID-19. So now it's almost 7 to 8 months since the pandemic has started. So all of you, many of you must have seen cases where COVID, or you may had patients who are having suspected COVID in your ART center. So I thought of having some basic discussion regarding clinical presentations of COVID, which are relevant to all of us, that all of us should be aware of the clinical features of COVID-19, how the patients presents, what are the different stages, because it is going to, some of our PLHIV patients are also may present with a COVID infection to all of us at the ART center. So that is why I chose this topic. So coming to the objectives of today's lecture. So we'll have an introduction, then transmission of COVID-19, how does it takes place. We'll discuss about some clinical features, some laboratory features, diagnosis, treatment. Then very important is the discussion on infection control practices, because that we are going to implement at our own ART centers. And then we'll have a short discussion about HIV and COVID-19. Coming to this COVID-19 pandemic, all of we know that coronaviruses are important human and animal pathogens. At the end of 2019, a novel coronavirus was identified as the cause of a cluster of pneumonia cases in Wuhan, a city in Hubei province of China. It rapidly spread, resulting in an epidemic throughout China, followed by an increasing number of cases in other countries throughout the world. In February 2020, the World Health Organization designated this disease as COVID-19, which stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. The virus that causes COVID-19 is designated severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, that is SARS-CoV-2. Coming to the transmission, the direct person-to-person transmission is the primary means where it spreads. This transmission occurs through close-range contact, mainly via respiratory droplets. So the virus is released in the respiratory secretions. When a person with infection coughs, sneezes, or talks, it can infect another person if it makes direct contact with the mucous membranes. If the person's hands are contaminated by droplets or by touching contaminated surfaces, and then they touch their eyes, nose, or mouth, then that results in infection. The droplets, the respiratory droplets, typically do not travel more than 6 feet. That is about 2 meters. So we all know that there is so much of discussion about social distancing. Means what is the distance to be maintained whenever we are talking with some person, or when we are seeing a patient, even in our ART OPD, or the pharmacist is dispensing medicines. What should be the distance which should be kept between the patient and the healthcare giver? It should be about 1.5 to 2 meters. That is very important. So even in your ART clinic, remember that the patient should be seated not just close to the medical officer, but there should be a distance about 2 meters. So that is the importance of social distancing, and why it is maintained, because the droplets will not travel more than 6 feet. So if you maintain that much distance, then it is less likely to get there is a chance of infection. The extent to which SARS-CoV can be transmitted through the airborne route. So the main we saw method of transmission is the via respiratory droplets. But what extent it can be transmitted through the airborne route, that is through particles smaller than droplets that remain in the air over time and distance, and under natural conditions, how much this mode of transmission has contributed to the pandemic are controversial. So according to some studies, there can be transmission even through particles smaller than droplets and through the airborne route. The pathophysiology of COVID-19, known and unknown. So stage 1, there is entry of virus and early replication. Stage 2, spread to lungs and other systems. And stage 3 is hyperimmune response phase, that is the cytokine storm as it is called. So whatever we know, there are these 3 stages. So as you can see here, the stage 1, it is seen in between in the first 7 days. So here there is viral infection and viral replication. So this is the stage of viremia. So what are the symptoms in this stage? The patient comes with fever, high grade fever, body ache, dry cough, diarrhea, or anosmia. And what are the lab investigation at this stage? We can see lymphopenia, there can be elevated CRP and mild elevation of LDH. Then coming to the stage 2. So stage 2 begins 7 days after the first symptoms. So this is the second week of the infection. And now the patient comes with dyspnea, hypoxia, lethargy, and easy fatigue. So the patient will say that 7 days back or 5 days back I had fever. And now fever has gone. And now the patient comes to the hospital with the symptoms of dyspnea. And if we check the saturation of oxygen by pulse oximetry, we see that there is hypoxia. So this is the stage 2, that is the pulmonary phase. And what are the lab investigations and imaging findings? If you do an X-ray, you will see pulmonary infiltrates, bilateral, generally lower lobe zone, there are infiltrates. And in the lab, you have elevated transaminases, the LFTs are elevated, and however the procalcitonin will be low or normal in this phase. And then there is a stage 3. So in this stage, there is a hyperimmune response phase. So the host immune response, as you saw in the stage 1, there is no immune response. The immune response begins in the stage 2. And in the stage 2, the immune response is manifested mainly in the lungs. And then you have a cytokine storm, and the host immune response is increased. So that is so stage 2 was between 7 to 14 days. And after 14 days, you have this hyperimmune response phase or the cytokine storm phase after 14 days from the infection. And patient will present with ARDS, systemic inflammatory response syndrome, shock, thrombosis, or thrombotic complications. I'll come to this a bit later, but we have seen many times patient presenting to the hospital with this thrombosis. So patient is directly coming in stage 3. So patient comes with a myocardial infarction, heart attack, or patient comes with stroke, or patient comes with cardiac failure. So sometimes the patients are coming in the advanced stage directly. And in this phase, what are the lab investigations? The metabolic parameters are deranged. There is elevated CRP, elevated LDH, D-dimer is high, IL-6 levels are high, ferritin is high. IL-6 is a specific cytokine response marker. So if the IL-6 levels are very high and patient is having clinical features of cytokine storm, like patient is having severe hypoxia and high-grade fever, again the fever may recur at this time again after the initial fever. So if the markers are high and the patient is rapidly deteriorating, then we give the drug tocilizumab. The ferritin also is a marker. Pro-BNP levels may be high, troponin levels may be high. Now coming to the clinical features, what is the incubation period? So suppose you come in contact with a patient of COVID. So what will be the time for manifestation of the disease? So median incubation period is 5 days and the range is between 2 to 14 days. So coming to the spectrum of illness severity. The spectrum ranges from totally asymptomatic. So many times we are having asymptomatic cases that they don't have any symptoms at all. So remember that even in your ART clinic, a patient may walk in, he doesn't have any symptoms, he's not having fever, nothing, but still he may be having COVID disease. So that's why it is very important to take universal precautions. Like for HIV, you are well versed with the universal biosafety precautions. That means whenever you are taking blood from any patient sample, you apply precautions, you wear gloves, you are taking biosafety precautions, assuming that all patients are infective, like having HIV or hepatitis B. So same way, we need to take precautions, airborne precautions. So wearing a mask, hand hygiene. So I'll be discussing about all these in the end. So these precautions are very important whenever we are dealing with patients. And the spectrum ranges from mild to critical. So we, in our JJ hospital, we had many patients who did not have any symptoms of COVID. So patient was admitted. I remember a patient with snake bite. Patient was admitted with snake bite. He had renal failure because of snake bite, and then he in the ICU he was shifted in the ICU. His initial swab was negative for corona, and then he developed. He was having persistent hypoxia. So we repeated the swab, and that came positive. So it is very important to have a suspicion, high index of suspicion for COVID, and remember that asymptomatic cases are there. So universal following of social distancing, hand hygiene, that is very important. Severe disease is seen in 14%. In mild cases, there is no pneumonia or only very mild pneumonia. Severe disease seen in 14%. Patient has dyspnea, hypoxia, and more than 50% of lung involvement in 4 to 48 hours on imaging. Critical disease is seen in 5%. Patients have respiratory failure, patients have hypotension and shock, and multi-organ dysfunction. So many times they are having renal failure. So we need to have a special dialysis unit. Whenever you have an ICU for COVID patients, we need to have a separate dialysis unit for such patients because they can have multi-organ dysfunction, including renal failure. Coming to the risk factors for severe illness and mortality. So these comorbid factors are very important. So whenever we see a patient, initially assess a patient of COVID-19, we need to see what are the risk factors for severe illness. And if they are there, then generally it is preferred to admit such patients. So the most important risk factor is advanced age. Age more than 65 years, definitely it is a risk factor for advanced severe illness. Then diabetes mellitus, very important risk factor. Cardiovascular disease, hypertension. So we have seen that if the patient has one or more of these risk factors, then the chance of a severe infection and mortality are much more high. So whatever deaths we have seen because of COVID in this pandemic, many patients had these risk factors like diabetes, especially chronic kidney disease. It's a very important risk factor. CKD patients have a high mortality. Diabetes, hypertension, these are common in India. Even your PL-HIV patients who are diabetic and hypertension, so you have to counsel them to take care. They should not go out to many places. So this counseling also should be done by us to our patients because already they are immune compromised, and if they are having such comorbid factors like diabetes and hypertension, then they should take more care. Chronic lung disease also one important risk factor. Then cancer, CKD, I already said we have seen a lot of mortality with CKD patients. Obesity is very important risk factor. We have seen a lot of deaths in obese patients. Then smoking. Then PLHIV with low CD4 and high viral load, they are having more severe illness and mortality. Then males had severe disease in China and Italy cohorts. Coming to the symptoms, patient can have symptoms like cough, fever, myalgia, headache, dyspnea, sore throat. Sometimes patients can present with diarrhea. Some patients have presented with pain in abdomen and have pancreatitis. Then nausea, vomiting. Loss of smell is a very specific symptom. So loss of smell or taste. So that is a common symptom. So patient complains of anosmia or no taste, and such patients generally have a mild disease. But we should suspect COVID in such patients and get the swab done. Rhinorrhea is less common. Then patient may have chills or rigors. Then fatigue. Fatigue is a very important patient symptom. We have seen patients just coming with fatigue and body ache, and when we tested for the swab, they came positive. So they didn't even, some of the patients did not even have fever. They just had plain fatigue, and they turned out to be COVID positive. So we should have a high index of suspicion, and whatever such symptoms are there unexplained, definitely we should advise for a nasal swab. And sometimes patients come with altered sensorium and confusion. And if there is no apparent cause for this altered sensorium, it can be COVID encephalopathy, which I will be discussing soon. Then chest pain or pressure. So one more manifestation of COVID is like a acute coronary syndrome. Patient comes with severe chest pain, and patient may have ECG changes, but he has an underlying COVID-19 infection. What are the complications of COVID? So the metabolic complications are very common, and we have seen very high sugars. Patients with COVID-19 manifestation with very high sugars. So that was a hallmark. In fact, whenever we had in this last 6 months or 7 months, any patient coming with diabetic ketoacidosis, we had a high index of suspicion for COVID-19, and we did a swab because many patients presented with decay. So hyperglycemia, diabetic ketoacidosis, and hyperosmolar hyperglycemic state. So these are very commonly seen in COVID-19. COVID-19 precipitates severe metabolic manifestations of diabetes and severe insulin resistance, and usually it is in the setting of a severe inflammatory response to the virus. Then coming to hypercoagulable state, patient can have DVT and pulmonary embolism. So various series are there with severe COVID-19 patients in ICU, and they showed that risk of DVT with or without pulmonary embolism was as high as 25% to 60% cases. So even in our experience, we at JJ Hospital, we have 2 COVID hospitals dedicated, that is St. George Hospital and DT Hospital. And the various patients in the ICU and wards in these patients, we found very high incidence of DVT with or without pulmonary embolism. Then arterial events, ischemic stroke. Many patients we saw, they came with IC bleed, or patient comes with a stroke. And then we used to admit these patients in a transit ward and do their COVID testing. So many such patients used to come positive during the, especially the peak of the pandemic was going on in May and June. That time many patients presented directly a stroke. They had no respiratory symptoms, and then on questioning, some of them gave history of fever. So they directly presented with a stroke. So that is very important to remember that in all cases of stroke, we need to rule out COVID-19. Then acute limb ischemia. I remember one patient who had breathlessness and he had a cold limb. He had almost a dry sort of gangrene. So he presented with a limb gangrene. So acute limb ischemia is a common presentation. Myocardial infarction, I already said. Many of our patients presented with myocardial infarction where they were taken directly to the cardiology ICU. They were thrombolized, and then their swab turned out to be COVID positive. So any patient with acute myocardial infarction, we must think of underlying COVID. And then microvascular thrombosis in lungs. This is a very important pathophysiology of hypoxia in these patients. Not all COVID pneumonia has ARDS. In fact, they have this microvascular thrombosis in the lungs, and that's why very important treatment in the management of these patients is anticoagulation. So I'll discuss that a bit later. Coming to neurologic complications, patient can have altered sensorium because of encephalopathy. Patient can manage with stroke, present with stroke. Patient may have meningoencephalitis, or patient can come with Guillain-Barré syndrome. Encephalopathy is common in critically ill patients. Just I want to announce that all the questions will be taken at the end. So whatever questions are there, you please type in the chat box and we'll answer them at the end. Regarding neurologic complications, the encephalopathy, that is patient has altered sensorium. If we do the CT scan, CT scan is absolutely normal. CSF also is most of the cases is normal, and all the metabolic parameters are normal. Still patient is having altered sensorium. In such a patient who is having unexplained altered sensorium, we definitely need to suspect COVID. Is very many of such patients turn out to be COVID, and these are seen. This is seen in critically ill patients who may have hypoxia, which is contributing to the altered sensorium. Then there can be metabolic derangements due to organ failure and medication side effects also. Many patients we saw in our ICU with COVID, there were patients presenting with delirium and agitation. So why these patients go into delirium? They suddenly become very rowdy, they are violent, and then they are very difficult to manage because such delirious patient, he will not keep the mask on. He removes the face mask, oxygen mask, he removes the NIV, the ventilation mask is there, that also is removed by the patient in that delirious state. So many things contribute to this delirium. One is that the patient is isolated in the ICU. And second thing, everybody is wearing a PPE kit. So there is no human touch. No patients, they feel very isolated because there is no human interaction. Somebody in the PPE kit looks very strange. And the elderly patients definitely, again, the relatives of the patients are not allowed in COVID ICUs because the relatives are, because of the risk of infection, no relatives is allowed inside. And so the patient feels absolutely isolated, and such patients very commonly they go into delirium. Then altered sensorium with decreased level of consciousness, that is again very common in these patients. Neurologic complications, I already said. Stroke is managed in a very manifold ways. One is a young person coming with stroke. He has no risk factors for stroke, but he is coming with stroke. Again, you should suspect COVID in such cases. Ischemic stroke is the commonest. Cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. At JJ Hospital, we saw many cases who presented with cerebral venous sinus thrombosis turned out to be COVID positive. Then intracerebral hemorrhage again. Many patients with IC bleed, and then underlying, then when we send a swab or we do the X-ray, we see COVID. So the heterogeneity suggests the mechanism of stroke is the result of inflammation and endothelial and coagulation dysfunction superimposed on the risk factors. Cardiac complications, acute myocardial infarction, arrhythmias, and myocarditis. Coming to the lab features of severe disease, particular lab features have also been associated with worse outcomes. Now these include a basic CBC gives us a clue. In a COVID patient, if we do the CBC and we see lymphopenia, the lymphocytes are reduced in number. So there is a ratio of neutrophil count to lymphocyte count, that is known as NL ratio. Because of the lymphopenia, the NL ratio becomes high. So an NL ratio more than 3.5. So you have to just divide by the neutrophil count by the lymphocyte count and you get the NL ratio. That is more than 3.5. Then the patient has the high risk case. Then elevated inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein and ferritin, they again suggest that this could be a cytokine storm or a severe infection. Elevated D-dimer more than 1 microgram or more than 1000 units is again a marker for severe disease. Whenever the D-dimer is more than 1000 units or more than 1 microgram, we prefer to give anticoagulation in such patients. Elevated prothrombin time. Then other markers are elevated troponin, CPK, elevated LDH. There can be acute kidney injury, so patient's serum creatinine is high, and elevated IL-6 is a marker specific for cytokine storm in COVID. This is an X-ray showing a typical COVID infection infiltrates in the bilateral lower zones and also in the peripheries. So it's a reverse pulmonary edema pattern. The infiltrates are more on the peripheries and in the lower zone. There is a predilection for the lower zone. This is a much more severe infection. So almost to the right side, the 75% of the lung is involved, as you can see. So bilateral, symmetrical involvement of the lungs. So severity and grading. Clinically, we divide the patient into 3 grades: mild, moderate, and severe, based on the saturation, SpO2 on room air. So now everybody knows that the pulse oximeter has become very common and used. So instead of the pulse ox, now we are using instead of the stethoscope, all the physicians are now using the finger pulse oximetry. So you just put the pulse oximeter, finger pulse oximeter on the finger of the patient and you check how much is the saturation of oxygen. And if the saturation SpO2 is more than 94%, it's a mild case. If it is between 90 to 94%, it's a moderate case. And if the saturation is less than 90% on room air, it is a severe case. A patient with a saturation of less than 90% on in room air should be directly admitted to a ICU. Respiratory rate less than 24 per minute, mild. 24 to 30 is moderate, and more than 30. The patient is highly tachypneic, respiratory rate more than 30. Again, is a severe case and he should be admitted in the ICU. A mild case has no pneumonia, X-ray test is normal. Moderate case has a pneumonia, and in severe case, it's a very severe pneumonia. CT chest criteria is a grading grade 1, 2 to 3, and grade 4. On CT chest, normal or less than 25% involvement is mild. Moderate is 25% to 75% involvement on CT, and severe is 75% to 100% involvement. So now there is a CORAD scoring, and there is a CT severity score. So CORAD score 3 and 4 indicates that it is a highly suspicious of COVID. So whenever now CT scan is done very commonly in all centers. So CORAD 3, 4 is special CORAD 3 is indeterminate. So CORAD 4 and 5 highly suspicious of COVID. CORAD 6 is it's a definitely proven case. So PCR swab positive case is CORAD 6. And what is the CT severity score? Severity score is out of 24. So a score less than 12 is mild. Then between 12 about 12 is moderate. 12 to around 18 is moderate, and more than 18 will be a severe score on CT. Okay. So less than 15, CT severity score less than 15, patient is not so severe, is mild. But more than 15, either it is moderate or severe, and such a patient again needs optimal treatment. And what is the classical finding on CT? We see the ground glass opacity, GGO. So what does this GGO mean? GGO on CT, that is they are the ground glass opacities typically seen in a viral pneumonia. So you see a bilateral ground glass opacities, and depending on how severe are these opacities, how much they are in the whole of the lung, we calculate the CT severity score. Again, early stages we see this GGOs or ground glass opacities, and then later on you can see consolidation, and in the patients in the late cases you see fibrosis also. So you can see fibrosis in the late cases. Coming to disease management according to the severity, in mild case it is managed at the COVID care center or managed at home, subject of fulfillment of the conditions stipulated in guidelines. So generally in mild case the X-ray is normal, patient has no hypoxia, no comorbid risk factors. Such a patient can be safely managed at home. The patient is advised home quarantine. Moderate patients, they are managed at dedicated COVID health centers like district hospitals, and there are some dedicated COVID health centers formed by the government. And the severe cases, they are managed at COVID hospitals which have ICU facilities. Now coming to the diagnosis, the gold standard test for diagnosis of COVID-19 is still the RT-PCR in respiratory tract symptoms. So you have to take the oropharyngeal swab and the ideally both oropharyngeal as well as the nasopharyngeal swab. But the nasopharyngeal swab, which is taken by putting the swab deep inside the nose. Okay, so that is much more reliable. The sample has to be collected and transported properly. It is very important to remember that a negative RT-PCR does not rule out diagnosis of COVID-19. Very, very important. Because the RT-PCR does not have a 100% sensitivity. So you can have 30% false negative cases. So sometimes it's actually the CT scan is much more important. The CT scan is showing CORAD 4 or CORAD 5, that means highly suspicious bilateral GGOs. Then even if the RT-PCR is negative, we treat such a patient as COVID. Then presence of lymphopenia, high CRP, ferritin, D-dimer, CPK and LDH may indicate severe disease. So CT is the most useful. Nowadays CT is very commonly now done. Everywhere CT is the first thing they do for the patient. So it has become very common and used now in this time of epidemic. And depending on the CT is showing finding suggestive of COVID-19. CFT severity score also is used and the CORAD scoring is used. Then even in RT-PCR negative cases, we do not say that this is not COVID. We still treat the patient as COVID-19. So CT is the most important. Now treatment, mild cases, they have only a upper respiratory tract infection. Here it's more of symptomatic. Vitamin C 100 milligram per day, tablet zinc 50 milligram OD, and favipiravir is now my antiviral used for the mild cases. So initially in the fever, patient is coming with fever. That means there is a viremia. That time favipiravir has a mechanism that it is antiviral, so it can be used. So the dose is 200 milligram, 9 tablets on day 1, then 4 tablets BD for 6 days. And some of the centers are using ivermectin. So ivermectin 12 microgram alternate day for 3 days along with doxycycline. So this combination also is being commonly used nowadays, ivermectin and doxycycline. In the initial time of the epidemic, we have made a lot of use of hydroxychloroquine HCQS 400 milligram BD on day 1 and then 400 milligram OD for 5 to 7 days. So now HCQS is not being so commonly used. Instead of that, we are using ivermectin and doxycycline. And then the antivirals have come. One of them is favipiravir and the other one is remdesivir. So for patients with pneumonia without hypoxia, so there is an infiltrate on the X-ray, but no hypoxia. So still we can try favipiravir. And in all patients with pneumonia, we give low molecular weight heparin, especially if there is a high D-dimer levels. So whenever the patient has COVID pneumonia, he must be given anticoagulation. Then pneumonia with respiratory failure means pneumonia with hypoxia. So very important is most important thing aspect of the management is appropriate oxygen therapy, because that will save somebody's life. If we give timely oxygen therapy, then the COVID-19 patient survival improves. So that is the most important part of the therapy that all of us should. So timely referral. So if you have a patient, immediately we should do a pulse oximeter and see if the saturation is low. If the saturation is low and there is hypoxia, we have to immediately refer to a COVID hospital. So what are the different ways we can give oxygen? By nasal cannula, then by face mask, and then there is the non-rebreather or the reservoir bag, high frequency nasal cannula, HFNC, NIV, and invasive ventilation. So these are the different modalities. So whenever the hypoxia is mild, there we can use only the oxygen cannula, nasal cannula. So in the wards, we have treated a lot of patients with just nasal cannula. The patient has a mild hypoxia, we give 2 to 4 liters of oxygen by the nasal cannula and the patient becomes all right. Some of the patients have more severe hypoxia, so we have to give a higher oxygen. So by the Hudson mask, that is the oxygen mask. So sometimes the patient will require as high as 6 to 8 liters of oxygen. Now more than that, if the oxygen requirement is there, even on 8 liters of oxygen or 10 liters of oxygen, patient's saturation is still less than 90%. Then we have to put the patient on a reservoir bag. This is a very simple equipment. It is not so much expensive, but these reservoir bags have revolutionized the treatment in COVID. We have managed so many hypoxic patients in JJ and St. George and GT with these reservoir bags. The picture is here. You can see below this nasal mask, there is a usual facial face mask, and below this there is this bag-like structure. So that is filled with oxygen. You have to put high flow oxygen at a rate of 12 liters per minute. So whenever you are putting the patient on this reservoir bag, the oxygen flow rate should be high. It should be 10 to 12 liters per minute. And then this bag fills with oxygen, and that acts as an oxygen reservoir. And we can give FiO2. FiO2 means fraction of the inspired air, that is oxygen. FiO2 has 90% oxygen, can be given with this equipment. So this rebreather mask was very important, played a very important role in managing hypoxic patients in this pandemic. And even it all hospitals, they have made optimal use of this rebreather mask. Then patients, sometimes even on the rebreather mask, patient is hypoxic. For such patients, there is an equipment known as high frequency nasal cannula. So it's a special equipment and it is not available everywhere. Even at our center, we have few such equipments in our ICUs. and this is well tolerated by the patient, and it gives a very high flow rate of oxygen, as high as 30 liters, 40 liters, up to 50 liters, or even more than that. So when the patient has severe hypoxia and the patient is put on this high frequency nasal cannula, then he can be nicely managed. Again, if the patient is not managed on high frequency nasal cannula and still patient is hypoxic tachypneic, then non-invasive ventilation means you have a ventilator and you have a mask, face mask, and you put that tightly on the patient's nose and oral cavity, and then you give non-invasive ventilation. And finally, even if that doesn't work, you have to intubate the patient and take on invasive ventilation. But we have found that patients who are on invasive ventilation, the mortality is very high. This is the rebreather mask. And then there is a CARP protocol. So what is this CARP protocol? It is a COVID awake repositioning or proning protocol. So what are the indications of using this? Isolated hypoxia. Patient should be having normal mental status. You cannot do this protocol in a patient who is having altered mental status. So patient should be awake, mentally alert, and he has just some hypoxia. And there should not be any multi-organ failure. So no multi-organ failure. So what we do, we have to change the position 4 to 6 times per day. And each position is kept for 2 hours. And what are the different positions? Right lateral, left lateral, then prone. So 2 hours. So for 2 hours, patient will be in the right lateral position. Then another 2 hours in the left lateral. Then you make the patient prone. Prone is make the patient ulta on the bed. And then sitting up at 60 to 90 degrees. So just if you do the patient prone, the hypoxia is much more improved. So remember this. Suppose you are at a periphery and patient is having hypoxia. Simply by proning and keeping the patient on oxygen, you can save the life. Then pneumonia with hypoxia. Steroids have been a very important part of the treatment. So injection methylprednisolone 40 milligram BD or dexamethasone OD for 10 days. Low molecular weight heparin, injection enoxaparin 0.6 ml subcut BD. So we have used the steroids and low molecular heparin, and many patients have got well on only these 2 medications, just oxygen, steroid, and low molecular weight heparin. That made a difference in many of our patients. We didn't have that time remdesivir or tocilizumab, but many lives were saved only on these 3 things: oxygen, proper oxygen therapy, steroids, and low molecular weight heparin. Now remdesivir also is being used, and the dose is 200 milligram IV for day 1 and then 100 milligram IVOD for 4 to 9 days. Remdesivir is used for all patients who have hypoxia, that is saturation less than 90%. Okay, then injection tocilizumab, it is useful for cytokine storm. It is a severe immunosuppressant, so its side effects are fungal and bacterial pneumonias. So it has to be used by a intensive care physician or an ICU expert in a proper dose. So it is used in a dose of 8 milligram per kg IV. Again, there are different studies going on with convalescent plasma. We are also using convalescent plasma in JJ, but it is not that effective. Now, most important, the IPC, infection prevention and control strategies for preventing or limiting the spread of COVID-19. So all of us as healthcare workers, all staff of ART centers should be aware of this. This we should apply for standard precautions for all patients. So all patients coming at ART centers, you treat as that potentially it could be an infective patient. So we have to ensure triage, early recognition, and source control. Again, very important. Suppose a person, the suspected COVID-19 infection has come to our ART center. Then how will you manage him? How will you ensure the triage? What will you do? You cannot panic. No? So there has to be a proper systematic protocol that such patient, suppose you have patients. So we are very useful, used to do this 4S screening in our ART centers. 4S screening was used to identify and triage the TB patients. So similarly, the same 4S symptoms. Now here you will not have weight loss, but fever, cough.
Fever, cough, sweating maybe. But fever and cough, these two symptoms, if you take as identifying corona, then definitely you can try. You can make them sit separately. Immediately, if the patient has fever or cough, give him a mask. Patient should not be coughing openly. So you have to give a mask for such a patient to wear and keep him separately away from all other patients. Then whenever such patients, he should be prioritized. Immediately he should be taken to the medical officer, should not remain sitting there for 3 hours. So immediately the medical officer should screen such a patient, and if the medical officer suspects COVID, he should promptly refer such a patient to an appropriate COVID center. So you should be aware of a COVID center or a COVID hospital nearby your ART center where you are going to refer such cases. Then implementing empiric additional precautions for suspected patient cases of COVID-19, implementing administrative controls, and using environmental and engineering controls. So all these are very important when dealing with patients at our ART centers. Now standard precautions. So this is a basic level of infection prevention and control precaution to be used for all patients at all times, regardless of suspected or confirmed status of the patient. Risk assessment is critical for all activities. That is, assess each healthcare activity and determine the personal protective equipment that is needed for adequate protection. So at our ART center, it is advisable that all the staff at least should wear a N95 mask. So N95 mask is the must for all the staff, whoever are dealing with the patients. Even the pharmacist who is giving the medicines, he should be wearing an N95 mask because he's going to come in contact with the patient. The medical officers, the staff nurses, the counselors, all of them should be, and I think NACO has made the arrangement to provide N95 masks to all the staff. So everybody should wear these masks whenever they are doing patient care. Then elements of standard precautions, hand hygiene. I'm going to discuss detail about hand hygiene. Then respiratory hygiene or etiquettes, PPE according to the risk. Then those who are collecting blood samples and they are going to come in contact with the patients, then they should be also wearing gloves. Okay, and those wherever there is a risk of aerosol generation and very close contact with the patients like the OPDs, we generally also advise PPE kits. But it is not sometimes practical to sit with the PPE kit all the time. It is not possible. So at least the gloves and the mask should be worn, and maybe you can wear the caps, caps and the shoe covers. Then safe injection practices, shafts management and injury prevention, that has to be done. Safe handling, cleaning and disinfection of patient care equipment. Environmental cleaning is important. Safe handling and cleaning of soil, linen and waste management. So all these are important aspects. Coming to hand hygiene is the best way to spread the germs in the healthcare setting and community, because our hands are our main tool for work as healthcare workers, and they are the key link in the chain of transmission. So our hands are touching the door handles, touching the cell phones, touching the medication, and when we are also touching the patients, okay, the surfaces where the patient has been sitting. So that's why hands can transmit the infection. So WHO, the 5 movements. So when you are going to do hand hygiene, so WHO has told about 5 situations where hand hygiene is very important. Hand hygiene means either you wash the hand or use a hand sanitizer. So when you will be doing that before touching any patient, it is very important because we can transmit a COVID infection to a patient. So before touching any patient, do a hand hygiene. Second is before doing any aseptic procedure, even before blood collection or any procedure we are doing on the patient, before that hand hygiene is very important. Third thing, after body fluid exposure risk. So patients, suppose urinary catheter bag is being touched, okay, police catheter, you are touching those things, hand hygiene is very important before that. Fourth thing is after touching a patient. So you are now touched a patient, maybe for examination or whatever purpose. After touching that patient, immediately you should do hand hygiene. Otherwise, the same hand will go to the eyes, will go to your mobile, and you can infect yourselves. After touching the patient's surroundings, again, we are touching the patient's bed, we are touching the patient's table he is using, because COVID is a very highly infectious virus and it can remain on the surfaces. So it is very important that after touching the patient's surroundings also that we do hand hygiene. So this is I have taken from the WHO guidelines and they are available. So how do we use hand hygiene? Use appropriate product and technique. So the technique is also important. It's not that just in 2 seconds you just wash your hands without soap and just that is not hand hygiene. So I mean, in details I will tell you explain the steps also. Now regarding sanitizer, what sanitizer we should be using? An alcohol-based hand rub product is preferable if the hands are not visibly soiled, and that has to be rubbed for at least 20 to 30 seconds. That is very important. Sometimes we just rub small amount of sanitizer for 2 seconds. So that is not enough. For at least 20 to 30 seconds, you have to properly rub it on the hands. And for hand washing, soap, running water, and single-use towel is required. If towel is not there, you can use the tissues, dry tissue. Especially when the hands are visibly dirty or contaminated, hand washing is preferable than only hand hygiene. And wash hands for at least 40 to 60 seconds. So what are the steps? Hand wash, you can see the steps here on the right side panel. In the step 0, wet hands with water, the tap. Step 1, apply enough soap to cover all hand surfaces. You can see the picture there for each step. Step 3, the picture is shown. Right palm of the hand over left dorsal with interlaced fingers and vice versa. Step 4, so all these steps you have to follow when you are washing the hand. Step 4 is palm to palm with fingers interlaced. Step 5 is back of fingers to opposing palms with fingers interlocked. Step 6 is rotational rubbing of left thumb. So we forget to wash the thumbs only when we are washing our hands. So rotational rubbing of left thumb clasped with right palm and vice versa. So the thumb also should have application of all the soap properly and it should be rubbed. Step 7 is rotational rubbing backwards and forwards with clasped fingers of right hand in left palm and vice versa. Step 8 is then finally rinse hands with water. Then step 9 is dry hands thoroughly with a single-use towel or dry tissue. Step 10 is use towel to turn off the tap. So same dry towel which you are having, that you don't have to touch the tap again. Then step 11 is now the hands are finally safe. So at least 30 to 40 seconds should be spent in properly thorough washing the hand. So that is real hand hygiene. Then hand rub. What are the steps? Again on the left side of the panel, how to use a hand rub. Step 1, apply a palmful of product in a cupped hand covering all surfaces. Step 2, rub hands palm to palm. Step 3, right palm, same again steps, right palm or left dorsum with interlaced fingers and vice versa. Step 4, palm to palm with fingers interlaced. So whenever you are using a sanitizer, do all these steps. It's not just that just mere thoda sa brush kar liya sanitizer हाथ को हो गया, ऐसे नहीं. So stepwise back of fingers to opposing palms with fingers interlocked. Step 6 is rotational rubbing of left thumb clasped in right palm and vice versa. So thumbs should be cleaned with sanitizer. Then 7th step is rotational rubbing backwards and forwards with clasped fingers of right hand and in left palm and vice versa. You can see the pictures also there. And step 8 finally that the hands are now clean. Now coming to respiratory hygiene and etiquette, this reduces the spread of microorganisms that cause respiratory infections. So this is a common respiratory hygiene for all this SARS, corona, not only corona, all the other influenza, so there was swine flu. This will also help in TB control. So turn head away from others when coughing or sneezing. This is very important. Cover the nose and mouth with a tissue. Whenever we are sneezing, should cover our nose and mouth with a tissue. If the tissues are used, then discard immediately into the trash. That tissue should not be kept lying on the bench where other patients are sitting. It has to be immediately discarded into the trash. Cough or sneeze into your sleeve. So suppose you are in a place where you don't have a tissue now and you are sneezing. So we have to sneeze into our sleeves if no tissue is available. Clean your hands with soap and water or alcohol-based products after coughing or sneezing. Do not spit here and there. That is very important. So all the patients also these things should be displayed in the ART center. Should educate the patients not to spit, not to sneeze or cough with openly, because again that will transmit the COVID to other patients. Promoting respiratory hygiene. So encourage hand washing for patients with respiratory symptoms. Provide masks immediately. So as I said, just like you identify this 4S, these two symptoms, fever and cough. Identify these two symptoms, make them sit separately. Immediately they should be taken to the respective whatever medical officer and they should be triaged. That is very important. They should be given masks. Patients with fever or cough or sneezing should be kept at least 1 meter away from other patients, and you should display visual aids reminding patients and visitors with respiratory symptoms to cover their cough. What are the PPE for use in healthcare for COVID-19? You have the face mask, that is the triple layer mask, which is covering the nose and mouth. So this is a very good protection. So it is almost as good as N95. Only thing, it has to be tied tightly. If it is loose, then from above and below there can be leak. So if you tie the face mask very tightly, then it is as good as almost as good as the N95 mask. N95 mask, it is covering the nose and mouth. Then you have face shield. So face shield, it covers the eyes, so protects the eyes also. It is very important because it is a mucosal transmission. So the virus can enter through eyes, and that's why face shield is very important. So ideally, everybody should be using face shields also, because the cough droplets sometimes they will enter the eyes. If not, if the mask is covering, but your eyes are open, and so face shield is also important. Then you have goggles. You cannot have a face shield, you can use a goggle for protecting eyes. And then you have the gown, the body gown, the apron, gloves for hands, and a head cover for the hair. Again, there are shoe covers also. So coming to the principles, I'll just discuss this briefly. How do you use the PPE? Always clean your hands before and after wearing PPE. PPE should be available where and when it is indicated in the correct size. You cannot use a very loose mask. Whatever N95 mask you are wearing, it should be tightly fitting. Otherwise, it will not offer any protection. So select according to the risk as per transmission based precautions. Always put on before contact with the patient. So before entering the OPD itself, your N95 mask should be put on. You cannot go to the OPD and already then you are going without any protection and then put it on. So put it before contact with the patient. Always remove immediately after completing the task or leaving the patient care area. Especially patients, there is a very high incidence of COVID transmission. We call it as doffing. So we doff the PPE. So doff the mask also itself there and then do hand hygiene. Never reuse disposable PPE. So PPE kit which is disposable cannot be reused. Now N95 masks, as per the AIMS guidelines, they can be reused if they are being used in the non-COVID areas. So you are wearing the N95 mask in a non-COVID area, then after use you can just hang it on a hanger for around either in the preferably in the sunlight, and then you can reuse it after 5 days. And such reuse should not be more than 3 times. Then clean and disinfect reusable PPE between each use. So for example, face shields, you have to disinfect it, wash them with soap and water or disinfect with sterile. Change PPE immediately if it becomes contaminated or damaged. PPE should not be adjusted or touched during patient care specifically. I have seen many doctors also that again and again touching their mask with their hands. So never touch your face while wearing PPE. And if there is a concern of breach, leave the patient care area and properly remove and change the PPE. It is important that we ensure environmental cleaning and disinfection procedures are followed. Thorough cleaning environmental surfaces, water and detergent, and applying commonly used hospital level disinfectants. So, especially for disinfecting, suppose a bed or surface where a patient is sitting, then sodium hypochlorite is very useful. Either sodium hypochlorite or ethanol 70%. They are effective. Medical devices, equipment, laundry, food services, utensils, and medical waste should be managed in accordance with safety routine procedures. It's very important in the trials that identify a patient of acute respiratory infection so that you prevent the transmission. So in your ART center, it is important to identify a suspect patient, prevent overcrowding, rapid triage. Okay. Place ARI patients, acute respiratory patients in dedicated waiting or area with adequate ventilation. Then, in addition to standard precautions, implement droplet precautions and contact precautions. Okay, ask patients with respiratory symptoms to perform hand hygiene, wear a mask and respiratory hygiene, ensure at least 1 meter distance between patients. The triage or screening area requires following equipment. There can be a questionnaire, algorithm for triage, documentation papers, PPE, hand hygiene equipment. You should have an infrared thermometer, waste bins and access to cleaning or disinfection and post signage in public areas. In the area during triage, ensure adequate space for triage, at least 1 meter distance between staff screening and patient staff entering. Waiting room chairs for patients should be 1 meter apart. Maintain a one-way flow for patients and for staff. Clear signage for symptoms and directions. And family members should wait outside the triage area. Prevent overcrowding in the triage area. Mask management. Place mask carefully to cover mouth and nose and tie securely to minimize any gaps between the face and mask. While in use, avoid touching the mask because on the surface of mask that can be a virus. And if you are touching the mask, then you are contaminating your hands. Remove the mask by using appropriate technique. It is never to be touching from the front, but remove the lace from behind. So you never should touch the mask. When you are removing, never touch it from the front. Remember that. After removal or whenever you inadvertently touch a used mask, clean hands by using an alcohol-based hand or rub or soap and water if visibly soiled. Replace mask with a new clean dry mask as soon as they become damp or humid. Do not reuse single-use masks, especially the surgical masks, three-ply masks which I have shown you. They cannot be reused. Discard single-use masks after each use and dispose them immediately upon removal. And last part of the lecture, this last 2 minutes, HIV and COVID-19. The impact of HIV infection on natural history of COVID-19 is uncertain. The clinical features appear the same as in the general population. We have seen many patients with HIV positive who were admitted in our COVID care hospitals, and the clinical course was similar to that seen in the non-COVID patients. Only some patients who were severely immune compromised with low CD4s, they had very severe illnesses and some of them died. Small cohort studies have suggested that outcomes in patients with HIV are largely similar to those seen in general population. HIV has been associated with more severe COVID-19 in some studies. Baseline viral load or CD4 cell count was not associated with worse outcomes among patients with HIV in a small study, although most patients in that study had virologic suppression and CD4 cell counts more than 200. In a multi-center cohort study from Spain, the age and sex adjusted mortality rate of patients with HIV and COVID was 3.7 per 10,000 people compared with 2.1 per 10,000 for the general Spanish population. However, many of the comorbid conditions associated with severe COVID-19, example, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes occur frequently among persons with HIV, and it is unclear whether these or the other potential confounding factors rather than HIV per se contribute to the risk. Some studies suggest that PLHIV with low CD4 counts are more likely to need hospital care. So in our experience, we had some patients with low CD4 counts and high viral loads. They had severe infections and some of them did die. Older PLHIV who have multiple underlying health issues like DM, hypertension, ischemic heart and CKD are likely to be at higher risk of severe COVID-19. PLHIV with CD4 less than 50 or an OI recently or in last 6 months to take extra precautions to protect themselves from infection. So that is the take-home message. We are going to counsel all your PLHIV, especially who have other health issues, that they have to take care. Our understanding the spectrum of COVID-19 is still evolving. Our management strategies are continuing to evolve. So 7 months down the line, we have now some clarity on this pandemic. Some techniques, some medications like steroids, low molecular weight heparin are working. Oxygen is the very mainstay of it is the most important part of managing our patients, and early detection, early screening, and prompt treatment can reduce the mortality. Thank you. What are the references? Up to date coronavirus COVID-19 management in hospitalized patients. So I mentioned the authors. The National Health Mission TOT PPT on infection control practices by Government of Assam. Slides on diagnostic pathophysiology and severity of illnesses, that is have been taken from Management of CL/HIV COVID-19 positive by Professor Kalpana Datta, who is the Professor, Program Director, PCOE MCH Kolkata. So some of the slides on diagnosis, pathophysiology and severity have been taken from this presentation. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Participants are requested to kindly unmute themselves if they have any questions.
You can either type your questions on the chat box, or you can ask. Yes, there is a question on use of Ecosprin. There are no specific guidelines for using Ecosprin, but you may use Ecosprin in COVID patients who have other risk factors like hypertension, diabetes, ischemic heart. Then you can give Ecosprin for 3 to 4 weeks after their COVID infection. Any other question?
Ma'am, there are no questions now.
There are no questions.
No questions.
Your patient listening.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.